Hey, guys, how are y'all doing? Can you hear me? I think you're muted. Carrie, your phone is muted. There you go.
There we go.
Yep.
So we're gonna watch.
Ma'am?
Are we gonna watch you dance too?
Oh, I know what's happening here. Let me see. Might be just the three of us.
There's Al. Hi, Al. Are you feeling better?
You're muted, man.
Good that it comes up muted.
There it
There
is.
you go.
Feeling much better. Still coughing a bit, but we'll see how it's.
My work friend she's had 2.5 weeks of fever, and the fever finally has broken, and but the chest pain's still there, and she tested negative as well.
Oh, really? Well, it's I get this usually about once a year, so not this bad, but some kind of bronchitis. Hi, Jonathan.
Right, Pastor.
You having a good spring break?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Hi,
What's the name of that kitty cat, Jonathan? What's the name of that cat?
Maggie.
Maggie. I should give her the chair, sir. Get your sister a chair, son. Thanks, buddy. Hey, friend zones. Hey, Mrs. Town.
Fran zones are gonna need a big phone.
You need a wide screen.
That's right, a widescreen phone.
Hi, Hannah.
Hi, Hannah.
We got two screens going on here.
Hey y'all,
Hey, Jared.
how's it going?
Going well, my friend.
Well, let's see here. I hope we're all running. I hope this is on YouTube and everybody can hear. And
It is on YouTube. I can see it. It's about we're about 3 seconds behind in YouTube, but Zoom is
all right.
so you want to mute your YouTube to have it on.
And I can mute everybody when we get ready to go if that's easier. I think I may
Oh,
be
yeah.
a co-host of this so that you could do the same if you need to. So yeah. Well, you want to give folks a little more time, or Yuri, or do you think we should just go ahead and get going?
Just a couple more minutes.
Sure, sounds good. You know any good jokes?
How much is a Brazilian?
For Brazilian, yeah.
For
my Solly tells the joke. This coronavirus, he said, "Dad, don't worry, it's not going to last very long." I said, "Why is that, Solly?" He said, "It was made in China." So, yeah. And then he tells us, he's like, "Dad, you know what? If you don't want to get the coronavirus, you should go buy some Dallas Cowboys." As a Saints fan, he's telling me this. Dallas Cowboys jerseys. He said, because they never catch anything. So we've used up my 2 Corona jokes. That's all I got. Yeah.
How do they say Corona in Louisiana?
Oh well, I'm not sure, but we don't say the quarantine. We say quarantine. Cornteen. Quarantine. You know, it's the redneck way.
Hey, Max, how are you, buddy?
Doing well. First time using Zoom, so getting used to it.
Rico kids are happy to see you here, man. Hello, Cassia.
Hi, Rachel.
One more minute, Mr. Jarrod, and we'll start, brother.
Oh, it's fine by me.
Okay. We got one. Hello, Rochelle is there.
And before we get started, I'm happy to make this as interactive as possible, given the technology. So I am still getting used to using Zoom, but as I understand it, there is the ability to raise your hand, not like Steve read to the kids on Zoom the other day in the church. He read the Narnia first 2 chapters, and he said raise your hand, but he meant digitally. And so several of the little 5 and 6-year-olds raised their hand. You know, he's like, oh, he forgot to say. But I think in the bottom right, there's a button that you can click that will alert me or Al or Yuri if you have a comment or question or something I say just completely backwards. Need to restate it. I'm happy to do that. But I'm hoping this will be interactive and fun for y'all, encouraging, especially since I can't see your faces in person like we were supposed to. You know.
I know. Hey, Benjamin. Jarrod, go ahead and start, my brother. Introduce yourself, if you will, to my
Sure.
people here. A small little portion, but a good representation here.
Oh, great. Yeah, this is wonderful. All right. Yes, as Yuri said, I'm Jarrod, and I am a longtime friend of Yuri Brito. Met him in 2008 in Conroe, Texas. I guess around the time he was coming your way. But we've been friends ever since, and we've talked about doing some version of this for a while. So I wish it could be in person, you know, but maybe the virtual meeting tonight will be whet our palates till we can get together in person. So I thought I'd pray first, and then we can jump right in. Hopefully, it'll be entertaining, and we'll talk and discuss and go for about an hour or less. So let me pray for us here. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity to be together. We thank you for the great gift of music. We thank you for your church, your love for us, and we ask that you would help us to be thankful in this crazy time we live in. Help us to continue to pursue you in new musical ways, that we might understand you better, that we might be made more like you, and that you would be honored by what we do and say tonight, and that we would be able to bring glory to you through it. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, I'm going to start with a parable here for you, a parable that I got from my good friend John Hodges. If you have the opportunity to come this way when we have John Mason Hodges, who's out of Memphis, please do so. But he has a wonderful parable that is, I think, very apropos. I think will frame our discussion tonight very well. It's about a man who was a jeweler. There was a fellow who lived in New York City, and he was into general jewelry. He didn't specialize, but he thought one day, I need to probably be more of a specialist in jewelry making if I really want to go somewhere with this. So he looked around and researched and studied, and finally he settled on jade jewelry. And so he looked the world over to see where could I be trained as a specialist in jade jewelry making. So he found a specialist in China, and he made his way to China, made arrangements, and he got to China and went to this man's shop, and through an interpreter was able to speak to him. And the man said, I'll give you a week's lessons of jade, how in jade making and jade, the craft and artisan of all things jade, $1,000 in essence. So this American man looked at that and thought, okay, all right, I think I can handle that. I mean, all right, if this is the world's expert or a expert in jade making, why not? So he looked at the man and said, okay. And so the man motioned him to come to the back of the shop. So he walked to the back of this guy's shop. He sits down at a table, and then this Chinese fella opens up the safe and pulls out this roll of felt. And he unrolls the felt on the table, and on it are all these pieces of jade. And then all of a sudden, he gets up and leaves the room. And the fellow thinks, so he'll be back in a minute, surely. Maybe he just had a phone call or something. And so he waits a little while, 15 minutes go by, and he starts to wonder where this fella is. Half an hour goes by, still no Chinese jeweler. An hour goes by, and this gentleman comes back into the room and rolls back up the felt, and he says, I'll see you tomorrow. The American says. He says, okay, maybe you had an appointment. Something must have come up. Surely something is, all right, tomorrow it is. All right, that's weird. But the next day he comes back at the same time. The jeweler brings him to the back. He steps to his safe. He takes out this roll of felt of jade, unrolls it, and what do you know? He walks up and leaves the room again. So this American sees this happen, and an hour later he comes back in the room, rolls the felt up, and says, see you tomorrow. The third day, the same thing happened. The fourth day, the same thing happened. Finally, on the seventh day, this guy's much more patient than I am. But the seventh day, he says, this is it. When this guy comes in today, I'm going to stop him. I'm going to give him a piece of my mind and say, wait a minute. So sure enough, the American walks into the Chinese jeweler's shop again for the seventh day in a row. And for the seventh time, he begins to roll out this felt. But this time the American says, wait, hold on a second. I've been here a week now, and each day I've been looking at jade with no teacher. You've walked out of the room and you haven't even given me a single lesson yet, he says. And what's worse, I don't have much time here in the country. I don't know what's happening. I need to learn jade. And then today, of all the days, you walk in here and you have the audacity to put in front of me inferior jade, the man says. And the teacher says, that'll be $1,000. Thank you very much. What does the parable mean if you think about it? When I tell this sometimes to folks, I ask, what is the parable? What is the meaning? And most of the time it's to music teachers. And I was like, well, you don't need music teachers. Everyone can teach themselves. Ha ha, no funny. I'm just kidding. That's not really the point. But the point is for us in this discussion this evening, and kind of what I hope will frame this up for you with what we can do together in this brief hour, is that if you want to know something that is good in any aspect of life, you have to be able to touch it, feel it, and look at it. What was this jeweler able to do? He was so frustrated that this Chinese man was leaving him every day. But what was he doing? He was able to recognize inferior jade on the seventh day. This Chinese jeweler unknowingly had rolled out or knowingly rolled out this felt, and it was not the same jade. And the man hadn't had a word spoken to him, but he had experienced and touched and gotten to know things. And that's really what we need to do. So I hope in a small bit tonight, we can experience some music, some encouragement, and we can go about maybe just kind of exciting you in areas that you already are excited, admonishing you and gently in things that you might need, that we need admonishing in, and maybe give you some things that you can talk over in your homes and in your church as you move forward in this day and age. So we as Christians have a need to appreciate the good and the lovely in God's creation. And as parents and members of our church, we've got to work at disciplining our children to do the same. And the area of music, as I see it, and maybe you would agree with me, is the problem is we haven't been equipped to do that in a lot of the recent generations. We aren't as musically literate as we once were. The church is not as musically literate, yet there is music everywhere. Right. So it's really quite a conundrum we find ourselves in, because there's technology that can let us listen to the best music of recordings all over the world and do so live if we want to at a very good clip. I mean, we're able to use technology here to do this, but at the same time, it's fair to say that less people in the church can make music joyfully. And that's just something we need to work on. So this session, when I was talking with Yuri about all of this, was I decided it wouldn't be best just to give my first talk. I said, maybe we should just kind of reframe this, given we're in the middle of this quarantine, as we say, up here in redneck West Monroe and Monroe, Louisiana. And I thought maybe just turning this into some encouragement for you all. So I've narrowed it down to a couple points. We'll do a little bit of listening. I'm going to turn these mics where you can ask questions. I'd love to hear your comments. It is a bit disconcerting, I will tell you, that every now and then I'll make a joke and it's silence, it's crickets. It's probably good for me. You know, it's a good sanctifying element. But let's get going. So the first thing, I'm not going to belabor this point, but I would be remiss if I didn't say it. The first point I want to say and encourage you in is music is not an elective in God's kingdom. Period. End of discussion. Latin is, but music is not. I was at a conference and I was able to speak with that, and that made a few people wiggle. And I said, I like Latin. I like to sing a good bit of Latin from time to time. There's some wonderful Latin and music have gotten along very well together for the better part of Western civilization. And I said, so don't hear me belittling Latin, but music is not extracurricular. We think it is, but in God's kingdom, the command to sing is not to a few, it is to all people. If you love the great hymn, All People That on Earth Do Dwell, the old 100th, sing to the Lord with cheerful voice, right? It's not all people that have a slight inclination, or a grandmother played the piano when they were young, or, you know, we know this. So that's the thing we have to coalesce around. And I like to say as an encouragement to you, and here's where it's going to get fun, I promise. It's not an hour of me talking, is that everyone can sing. In our English language, everyone can sing. We think of singing and chanting, and we break things up where languages don't do it. We think that there is a special ethereal thing called singing, and we're right, there is. But there's also a very real sense in that we, as people who speak, are being musical. Our voices have a cadence. Our voices have a pitch, a rise and a fall. Our voices have a rhythm. And when I start to tell people that, they go, huh. And you might have heard other people say that. It's until you start to repeat the same phrase over and over again that it really comes into focus. It's until you start to repeat the same phrase over and over again. It's still, you see, there's a pitch to my voice. There's a musical quality. So if I haven't persuaded you yet that you can sing, and when you talk, very few people, I have not met anyone that's truly monotone. People say, oh, I can't sing. I can't carry a tune in a bucket with a lid on it. Well, there are people who can't sing and who can't sing well. They need more training and work, and they may not be able to. They may have not done it. But most people don't have a monotone voice. A monotone voice is this, right? Hello, how are you doing? There is no real rise. It's really hard to do. I'm doing it now. I'm rising my voice again, you see, and you hear. So I want to admonish you that if the Lord gives you, as if you've heard David Erb say, if the Lord gives you 30 or 40 more years, you can put some efforts in singing, just like you could take up Swahili if you had 30 years and you knew you would have them. So I would encourage you, you can sing. We may not ever want to hear you on a CD or on a solo track on iTunes or Spotify, but by virtue of having a voice and you don't have some irregularity physically that the Lord has given you, you can sing. But don't take my word for it. I want you to hear something here. This is so left field. I promise you, we've not been hacked. This is part of my presentation. So listen to this. I want you to hear this presentation here. Listen to the musical quality of this. You've probably seen this video from Oklahoma several years ago. I want you to listen to the words and keep in mind what I said about the cadence and the pitch there. So take a listen.
My friend came to the door. She said, well, I was on the phone cooking me and my baby some breakfast. And she said, hey, something wrong. It's popping. I said, what? She said, yeah. I said, no. So the girl come downstairs. She come out her apartment with her baby with no shoes on. I said, oh, girl, it's cold outside. She said, something ain't right. I said, oh, man. She said, oh, man, the building is on fire. I said, no, what? I got my 3 kids and we bounced out. We ain't gonna be in no fire. Not today. My friend came.
You see what I mean? That's about as musical as speech can get. But I don't know that I have you convinced just yet. If you've seen this next video, this is a Brazilian, I believe, or South American. I'll have to check, Yuri. It's a guy named Publio Delgado. Plays the guitar almost as well as Pastor Brito. But he plays it and he does these harmonizators is what he's calling it. He takes this video. Watch the guitar chords in the corner of the screen. I believe it'll be up here in a second. Listen to the musical quality of the speech when you have the guitar show it to you.
My friend came to the door. She said, well, I was on the phone cooking me and my baby some breakfast. And she said, hey, something wrong, it's popping. I said, what? She said, yeah. I said, no. So the girl come downstairs. She come out her apartment with her baby with no shoes on. I said, oh, girl, it's cold outside. She said, something ain't right. I said, oh, man. She said, oh, man, the building is on fire. I said, no, what? I got my 3 kids and we bounced out. We ain't gonna be in no fire, not today. We ain't gonna be in no fire, not today. We ain't gonna be in no fire, not today. We ain't gonna be in no fire, not today. We ain't gonna be in no fire, not today. We ain't gonna be in no fire, not today. So they wanna say today.
You get the idea, I trust. So you catch my point. Humorous as it is to bring it in that light into a viral video, I bet you didn't think you would see that in this talk tonight. Well, that's what you get for tuning in on a Thursday evening. So hopefully I have your attention. But what you see is that is very musical speech. And he's tracing that, her speech, and with his guitar, which really highlights just how musical our speech is. So that doesn't mean that she could sing opera for the New York Met. What it means is we need to think that there's far more musical speech than we think. We think singing is this high art form, and that's just not the case. So we can be encouraged. All right, so that's number one there of this whole idea. The second idea is that we as Christians need to understand that music is essential for training hearts and minds. You've probably heard the quote by Joseph Fletcher, who said, "Let me write the songs of a nation. I do not care who writes its laws." It's a very powerful quote. It's very true. We see that people don't care what the laws are. They worry about the pop ballads, and they use those to move ideas. You probably read or heard Pastor Brito talk about James K.A. Smith, and his books Desiring the Kingdom, Imagining the Kingdom. He's got another book, You Are What You Love. He's got a great distinction, I think, in that where he summarizes the whole goal of education in a lot of senses is not so much information as it is formation. And music has a very formative power. It gets in there. And parents and church leaders, we need to work and think about this, about the shaping quality of music on ourselves and our children's. Listen to me, I'm going extra plural here, but on our children, so that they can memorize music, so that we can sing joyfully, so we can use this thing. But we want to shepherd our kids through this on what they hear and what they sing and what they memorize within the area of music. We don't want to be puritanical, but at the same time, neither do we want to be lax in the name of not being puritanical. You've seen both sides, people in both ditches. So the idea for me is I want to give you a taste of what some of the good is. I want you to think of music like a good meal, a good diet. I want you to think of music like language tonight. I hope you interact with that. We'll talk a little bit about that there. But right now, what I want to do is stop talking, and I want to let you listen to something. So I'm going to give you a slight bit of setup so that you know what to listen to. Most of you probably have heard of J.S. Bach's B minor Mass. It was 1747 that he started to write it, I believe. In 1749, the year before he died, he finished his large Mass. It's the same that we always hear, the Latin Mass, where it has the Kyrie and the Gloria and the Credo and the Sanctus. It's all set. It's not like Bach. Bach was writing in Lutheran Germany, so of course he was writing cantatas that were set in the service, so it would use the lectionary and hymns. He was using existing music. So it was interesting to see he would write this large magnum opus of sorts, not his passions, but he would write this Mass. So I want you to listen to one movement in the middle of his B minor Mass. It's the Crucifixus movement. You can guess which part of the Nicene Creed that's going to highlight, but it's the text is Crucifixus etiam pro nobis sub Pontio Pilato passus et sepultus est. So Christ, he's crucified for us under Pontius Pilate, dead and was buried. Quite maybe literally, you could say there. So I want you to listen to that. This is a BBC Proms arrangement of that. The subtitles may have some of the English in there. Just let it wash over you. Give your eyes and your ears attention to it. Try to actively listen to it, and then we'll talk about it. So here it is, the Crucifixus from the middle of Bach's B minor Mass. That's about as powerful of a telling of the Crucifixus. Now, for some of you, you may listen to that and go, "Boy, that was beautiful," but there's might be hard to interact with it. I like to think of it as music is a language, and we oftentimes admonish one another: put classical music on in the background at your house, but we don't tell each other go put on, a German audiobook, right? In the background while you're cooking dinner. It'll help the mood. No one says that because we understand that language, if or Chinese or just Gesundheit in the background, it's going to be distracting. It's not really. But we've somehow bought the thinking that music is not a language. It doesn't have a grammar, a history, a component to it, and so we try to treat music like it's this extra thing, but we would do better. I want to argue if we think of music as a language, it's one to be understood and to be mined the depths of. So I want to give you a few more. Jim Jordan would say through new eyes. I want to steal it and rip it and say through new ears, so you can hear this through new ears. And that is a little bit about this work, and then we will listen to it again with the music in front of you. What I want to tell you is this is in a chaconne. If you've heard of the famous violin chaconne, or a passacaglia, if you ever heard of Purcell's Dido's Lament, this is set up in a way where there's a weeping motif, crucifixus, where the notes come down. It also has 12 phrases, where the 13th phrase, 12 4-measure phrases, where you have the bass going D, 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 where it's always going down. This is what's called this passacaglia or chaconne. It's a theme which is like Christ going to the grave here. Bach is literally writing this in, so that there's a 3D-ness to the music. Besides, well, Marge, that was pretty, but that's what a lot of our interaction is if we don't know music. And we don't as a culture. We think, well, it was choppy there, it was loud there, it was fast there, it was movingly soft there. But we want to be able to interact with music in a more skillful way. So a few more things about this here. As I mentioned, there's all kinds of downward motion. At the very end, it's in an E minor key. Those of you who have been around music your whole life and sing and all that, you understand that there's a quality from E minor to G major. They're related, they're cousins. And this piece is in E minor, and it ends in 12 phrases of this pattern, but the 13th pattern comes with something unexpected. It comes with a quiet, somber resolution. The word is sepultus est, and you'll hear it at the very end. Suffered and buried was, and Jesus goes into the grave. The quietest yet hopefulest part of the whole song. Bach could have resolved to E minor, to the dark chord. He says, Jesus is going into the grave, into the tomb, with a major chord. There's a hopefulness to that, not accidental. So let's listen to this one. This time you'll have not a group performing. This time you'll see the music and track. I might even pop up on the screen to point some things out, but don't be alarmed. All right, nothing has happened to me too seriously. that's the beauty of this work. But guess what? In the Nicene Creed, what is it? It doesn't stop there. And what does it say next? You know, and the third day. Completely different feel as you would expect, right? But what I want you to see is look what's happening here. Bach ended the piece on a G major chord. He sprang and leaped to this, uh, to this D major chord. And it's as if I could get the music in front of you, I thought I had it ready to play. But if I were to have it in front of you, you would see the notes are just chasing. It's as if the women are running to the tomb, as I've heard one musicologist describe it. Now, I play all that to show you there is a purpose that has been put into this music. We don't subscribe to music that's old and say it's better because it's old, nor do we say music that's new. There's not that chronological snobbery. We are aware of that in our circles, but there's a reason why we should give good credence to the old, because more often than not, things that have come before us, as Lewis is so great to admonish us. You remember what does Lewis say when he's in the on the incarnation, where he says the only palliative is to keep the clean sea breeze of the centuries blowing through our minds, and this can be done only by reading old books, you know. And he said there's not, of course, that there's any magic about the past, but if we're going to keep the sea breeze through our minds, we need to have books that are outside of our time. You know the quote from Lewis. He has a much longer portion of that, but we need to probably be deferring to what has come before us, because more often than not, they would have had to study. Bach and others would have had to study the masters before them. They would have had an awareness of who has come before, and they would have had the opportunity to do what we often forget in our culture, which is to give thanks. That's really a huge part of this. So listening to music through new ears means you've got to have music maturity. So what I want to do is take a few minutes. I'm going to give you the opportunity to, I'm going to pause here, and we'll talk a little bit more about how do we get to where we can understand music that is rich and layered, like the Bach Crucifixus from the B minor Mass, or anything by Bach, or even just instrumental works. Maybe you want to listen to music by Smetana, his Moldau, his Wonderful River in outside of Prague. Maybe you want to listen to that. That's another great example with no words, right? That would be a benefit to us and has a language to it. Well, the way we do that, the short answer that will be on the test, you know, is music literacy. We're not going to see a musical mature church without literacy. So we're not going to see us have a desire to sing harder music and greater forms and more diverse types of hymnody and stuff that's old and stuff that's new. But we need to see music literacy. Like I said, we need to lean on the past, because as Lewis and others would admonish us, things have come and worked their way out in the wash that we might not see in our own day, in our own generation. So those are the 3 points of encouragement. What I'd like to do is, if you have some questions or comments, what's disconcerting for me is y'all are muted back there. So you may be laughing or throwing tomatoes back there, and I don't have any idea. So what I think, if you want to, you can unmute yourself if you're on the Zoom portion here. Or you can raise your hand. There's that little button, I guess, and hopefully somebody will see you. And if you have a comment or a question or something there, or if you just want to state something that you thought I would have liked to heard, I'd love to do that, just to give a little human interaction here, so this is not too socially distanced over Zoom. Anybody?
Jarrod, what I noticed in the in music preceding the 18th century is that there is this intentionality in the rising and the going down, right? So you have this dramatizing of crucifixion scenes where there is an expectation for a crescendo to come for the third day. You saw this in that Bach piece. And in a lot of contemporary music, there's some good ones, but a lot of contemporary music, it actually does become rather monotone, or they go up when they shouldn't go up, where the thrill shouldn't be there. Is there any kind of, I don't know, musical rationale for this, a musical rationale for why this no longer takes place today? No, where do we fail to dramatize our music?
Right. That's a very interesting observation, Yuri. I think the first thing I would say is a large part of it is how do you name a painting and something by Picasso, or maybe how do you paint the Mona Lisa and all you have is black? You have no other shades. If you don't have that, then how do you do that? And so Bach had all of the musical tools, and composers before him, up to really the light Enlightenment is a good spot to look, because things shifted. They didn't go away immediately after with the rise of the Enlightenment, but they started to trend differently after the Enlightenment. But yes, that's exactly right. So it's hard for a young person who's not had formal music training to write something like a Bach, to write this. And if you don't have the right theology that God is Lord over every, as Kuyper says, right, over every square inch, that he cries, "This is mine." That means every note, every rhythm, every slur, every articulation by a bowed instrument, every crescendo and rise and fall, he's Lord over it all. Then if you don't think that way, you also don't go the extra mile to pack in meaning like Bach did. Some people never saw that. If they've never seen the score, they might not have seen that he made the old Kai in the score by having the sopranos come in, and then he had the skip of the tenors, and then he would come back and have the altos and then the basses. He was making a sign of the cross with just what voices would enter, because that's how three-dimensional he thought. We don't think that way, and we don't have the music training, sadly, too. Even if we had the theology that supported it, I think a lot of these go hand in hand. We could have more better musicianship and better music literacy in our churches if we had a better awareness of the scriptures and the call for music. And we'd also have, the better our musicianship, we'd have a better understanding of the scriptures, hopefully, because we'd have more things to sing and have the opportunity to sing more of the Bible, which is a good bit musical. But I think that's really where that would be my answer is, how do you paint the Mona Lisa with two colors out of the, the chromatic palette of paints, in the infinite sound paintscape that you have? Well, a lot of musicians are resorting in the church to just rewriting the hymns because they can't play them. So you had a deathbed atheist in Ray Fawn Williams who wrote the wonderful premier hymn of funerals, which I'm sure y'all sing at funerals from your church from time to time, For All the Saints. And it's, for all the saints, it's this lovely big jump melody that this atheist wrote, right? That on his deathbed refused to convert, seemingly. And yet it is a wonderful, glorious melody. But you have Christians today who have, in the Sovereign Grace movement and other places, who have decided, we need a better tune for that. And so, for all the saints who from their labors rest, who thee by faith before the world confessed. You see, it's a very smaller range. Now, there may be part of the church that have a need to sing that for a time. But what we see is that's happening for a reason. I think that gets to what you were saying, Yuri. Does that kind of touch on it, or is there some other thought there that you had with that? Anybody else have any thoughts, comments?
Jarrod, this is Jim Hunter. I'm not on video because I'm a conspiracy theorist.
Okay, Jim.
But
Welcome anyway. You don't have to see my mug. You'll probably be better off for it.
no, my question is, you were talking about how we need to look back to the old in order to get which with which I completely concur. But here's my question: to what were Bach and Mozart? What were they looking back to, or were they just because of the Protestant Reformation? Whether they were Catholic or Protestant, it's not the issue, but the fact that it had become so central to the culture at the time. Is that why God goes, okay, now I'm going to give you the greatest composers that ever lived? What's your thought on that?
Yes,
and could they look back to anybody?
Yes, they most certainly did. That I would say that arguably Bach is the chief musician of chief musicians in all of history, in Western civilization for sure. The greatest church musician to ever live didn't start from scratch on the majority of his compositions. He is quoting pre-existing materials. If you look at his Bach Cantata 4, which is where we know the hymn, Christ Jesus lay in death's strong bands for our offenses given. That hymn, Bach took and put in a cantata and reworked it, but he was just borrowing a Luther rework of a Victime Pascali Laudes chant from, hundreds of years before. So what you're getting at, and I think is that no, Bach didn't write in a vacuum. The great composers who were in and around that time period where they saw the world as part of God's musical order, just like they saw life and science. It was less humanistic than we have today. We're so run amok with that. But in that day, Bach saw things differently. And yes, he knew melodies and would quote musical passages. He would quote hymn tunes. There are all kinds of writings out there. You can bore yourself with so much out there about the music that Bach quoted or that he used and glorified. He moved it into something better. Music, hymn tunes by Walter and by Luther and countless others. He didn't just do what was and write something. And I think that's a lesson that we all should take up, is that if arguably the greatest musician, church musician in the Western tradition to date, saw it important enough to glorify music that has come before, why shouldn't we? Right. And I think that's something that if we're going to move to the next level of maturity in our church music, that's going to need to be something that we consider heavily. Yeah, that's a very good one.
And who would you say are the guys that are doing that right now?
There are guys doing that. I know Jonathan, James McMillan in England, or I think he's an Irish or Welsh composer. He's Roman Catholic, but trying to compose downstream and standing on the shoulders of who's come before you. I mean, that's really the goal. But to do that, you have to be thankful. And you can't be thankful for what you don't know. I mean, sure, you can say, thank you, Lord, for that. And it's a cursory write-off, right? But if you really want to be thankful, you got to get to know it. You got to know it like we know what the word knowledge means. We've got to know. And I think that's why I'm not in a hurry to write new music. I am not disparaging those who want to tackle new music. I'm not disparaging making new tunes. I just think we've got a plenty of old stuff to churn through and to recover. And so this really, I guess, brings me around here. If you've ever read the book called Common Objects of Love, is Oliver O'Donovan. He has a wonderful admonition to us about tradition and culture. And he did something that he made a comparison to the fifth commandment of honoring our fathers and our mothers in the faith, of going about, and I'll read you the quote. He says, the duties of children are purely responsive to the duty of parents to be to their children what their parents were to them. This is a command addressed to adults whose existence in the world is not self-posited, but the fruit of an act of cultural transmission, which they have a duty to sustain. The act of transmission puts us all in the place of receiver and communicator at once. The household is envisaged as the primary unit of cultural transmission, the father and the mother as representing every existing social practice, which is important to carry on. Only so can community sustain itself within its environment, the land which the Lord your God gives you. No social survival in any land can be imagined without a stable cultural environment across generations. By tradition, society identifies itself from one historical moment to the next, and so continues to act as itself. And we don't want to be traditionalist, where we're trying to just prop up old traditions. But what we want to do is we want to be in context. And I think Oliver O'Donovan and C.S. Lewis, to a point, these guys are helpful to us. I think they would give us good counsel if we would listen to this kind of sentiment. Let's see here. Any other comments or questions on these lines? These are great so far, helpful to me.
This is Jonathan Franzo.
Hi, Jonathan.
My family and I are fairly new to psalm singing, and we've been musicians for our whole lives. And one of the things we noticed about the old psalms that we sing is there's not a lot of time signature, and it's difficult to detect a key. Now, when I listen to Bach, I hear a lot of structure, I hear a lot of meter. So help me think through like the difference between singing psalms, which it's kind of hard to follow, versus something like Bach, where it's very easy to pick up and listen to.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. The first thing I just off the top of my head here in responding to that is a lot of times in certain hymnals, when the music is old enough, it wasn't metered, like we have a lot of our Western music, because the meter of the Psalms is not the strophic meter that we use in our hymns, meaning we don't have, we sing a lot of metrical psalms. And so some of them we and hymns, and so we want to go, the Lord's my shepherd, I'll not want, right? But that does a rework of the text. It's not a bad rework. It's also, you have to kind of poetically retranslate it to fit the tune. D D D D D D D D D D, right? But a lot of times in the Cantus Christi, which y'all I believe use, the songs are in keys, they're just not in major or minor. They're in other modes, or they wanted to take that out to make it not distracting. Also to reflect music of a bygone era. Usually what you want to look for in those, as you probably well know, is you want to look to see what's the common rhythm. Is it the half note? Is it the whole note? Is it, we're just used to everything being in something 4, right? In church music and in a major key. And so the first time you sing something in a minor key, kids love minor keys. They love it. I find in my music classroom, they love that. They get tired of everything happy clappy. You know what I mean? Not clappy, but they get tired. Sometimes they want to, sing about who killed Cock Robin, right? In my art and folk song classes, they want to know that. They have a palette for minor. So yes, a lot of times in the cantus, you've got songs in keys or in modes, because some of these music, it's Dorian modes and Tallis in the back there, which just goes to show you there's so much more we don't know musically. Because if you're like me growing up, it was just, it was the Broadman hymnal, Southern Baptist hymnal, and then it was praise bands. And it took a while for me to kind of re-see music and see that there's a lot of old music that is rich, Palestrina, Tallis, Purcell, that don't need the tight meters that our hymns have a lot today. I hope that kind of answers it. Any other thoughts, or does that kind of get at it, Jonathan, or no? Or anybody else? These are good questions. Happy to entertain more of them.
Jarrod, one time I was walking with James Jordan, and I made the absurd observation to him that what he was attempting to do at our church back in 08, 09 was too ambitious, and that we would never reach that level of literacy. And in those days, he was beginning to play Psalm 45 as a prelude just to get us prepared for it. And I remember when he played that as a prelude, that the service ended and everybody stayed in their chairs listening to him play. And 3 weeks later, we were singing that Titanic piece, you know, which is and all
Throat buster. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really is. If you can sing that, you can sing anything. Anyway, so he looked at me when I said that we would never reach that level. He said, if we begin to teach our little ones, we can do unimaginable things. It was a kind rebuke he gave me. So there's a ton of children in our congregation. We need, stoplights after the service is over. They're all over the place. How would you encourage some of the parents in our church here to begin to sort of inculcate these habits and rituals at home?
Yeah, that's very good. Very good launching point for sure. The first thing I like to encourage parents with is that you've got to be mindful of two principles. You want your home to be an active music home, a creating music home, more than a receptacle. You don't want to be receptors of music. You want to be recreators of music. So you want to think and plan and strategize. It's perfectly fine to have music played, to play classical music. I don't want you to, my earlier comments, to diffuse any energy in that. But there's nothing magical about music played in the background. What you want to see is you want to see your children, whether you can sing or not, in your churches, to see you make a priority on singing. In front of them with one another. It doesn't have to be the entirety of that Psalm 45. It could be a short little canon. It could be the doxology at first. It could be one verse of Now Thank We All Our God. There's many things. It could just be the refrain like we do around my dinner table on each Sunday on the way to church, and after we pray at lunch, we sing, Hail thee, festival day, blessed day that art hallowed forever, day wherein Christ arose, breaking the kingdom of death. Just that little bitty bit. And so you start there. You tell your kids, whether you can sing or not, that it's important. And so what I tell people, like, well, I just can't sing. I can't lead. Well, your wife may be able to lead, and y'all do it together on a song. Or maybe you've got a child that can sing. Let them sing the doxology. Let them pitch it. But guess what? If your son or your daughter see you struggling and not giving up, you have communicated the message, right? That singing is important, and that we don't want to stay where we are. That you may have not grown up. You have to give thanks where you are. I always say this: as hard as it is to do, it's easy to say. You may not be able to sing. You need to be able to give thanks, and don't let and work towards others around you being able to sing. Be it your kids, be it the kids in your church, be it the choir at school, be it, work and use your gifts that way. So piano lessons are fine, but what I also want to encourage parents is you need to differentiate between having children that are button pushers, and by that I mean who can get the mechanics of the violin but can't get the right intonation, and it sounds like someone has killed a cat only partially next door, right? You know the sound I'm talking about. I don't need to play it. They don't have the musicianship to match the mechanics. And a lot of you maybe have heard this. You've heard someone say to you, or you've said to someone else, oh, I took lessons in that, but I just don't play it. I never do it anymore. Well, something may have happened there. Either the love got squashed along the way, or providentially hindered from continuing, or you never got the connection of musicianship and mechanics. And it's better to get musicianship between the ears before button pushing in the fingers, whatever the pushing or playing or doing. That's the thing you want for your children. So you preeminently want them to sing. You want them to, it's fine to go to instruments, but you want to cultivate singing in your church and in your children. You want them to sing as much as possible. I mean, that would, if you can put them in a choir, great. You can send them to our music camp every summer, great. We'll open the doors wide for you, or do those kinds of things. But yes, singing needs to be a priority in the Christian home for children, and they need to see us doing it. It needs to not be weird for us to have people over, and I don't think this is weird in y'all's church, especially for those of you watching this. You had the the desire to hear this topic, so you probably are not hung up on this, but I'll say it anyway. And that is, it's got to not be awkward or uncomfortable to just finish dinner and say, let's go grab some song sheets and sing. Or, hey, let me grab the guitar and let's go play a James Taylor song, or and just be musical. I think it's so much help to us as Christians. We don't have to have all the right words sometimes. We just need to be like God. We need to feed people, laugh, cry with them, sing with them, make music. And I think our ministry and y'all's ministry as a church, like I'm seeing here for us, is only going to be helped by that kind of thinking, by more singing and more music. Does that kind of get at it, Yuri? Or what else? What other things am I forgetting that you would say, don't forget that? Give me the old elbow.
No, that's great, Jarrod. I think that's great. I think the continuation of what happens on Sunday through the week is really crucial in how that builds the expectation for the following Sunday. So you get to the point where the children are saying, what are we singing on Sunday? What are we singing on Sunday? And those are great questions to ask. I am actually happier when they ask that question than, hey, Dad, what are you preaching on?
Right.
Because music is theology and poetry. So I think that's a good thing, good question to have.
So Karen, you're unmuted. I see you had your hand raised. Did you have something you wanted to add or a question?
I guess another question. So we know that on Amazon Music or YouTube, we can find classical music and we can find contemporary Christian music. Where do we find psalms or other such quality music that we could add to our listening repertoire?
Oh, good question. Yeah, it's out there. It's not as monetized because it's also not as popular right now. So, and people pick up on that. But yes, whether you're Dr. Erb has his stuff is all online, or you can find psalm chants. You may have to listen because some of this stuff may be a little dusty. It's sadly, a lot of these recordings are recorded by monks in cathedrals somewhere in Europe, and they don't feel like our churches. They're cavernous and cold, and the recordings don't sound the vigor that we have in our churches. But it might give us an idea. It might expose us to other types of psalms. There's Anglican chant stuff out there that is basically, like we said earlier, that singing is glorified speech. It's just elevating your speech into a musical tone. So if you look at Psalm 1, your Coverdale Psalm 1, in the Cantus Christi, it's a lovely Anglican chant there. And it's just so that you meditate on the words, and it's not as this way with the melody as a hymn would be, or a metrical psalm, let's say. But yeah, Amazon's got it, Spotify. Dr. Erb has some great songs that you could learn in your home, and have that. There's also Jamie Souls. I mean, that's people probably think musicians like myself only eat filet mignon for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day of the week. Like during this COVID-19 stuff, I mean, we're just raking in all the steak and the red meat because that's, you can't even find it. But that's not the case. You want a good balanced diet. I think you want to listen to good music, and that really brings up, what's your standard of beauty? Are you trying to be, when you're assessing, is something have good content? Is it written well? Is it composed well, and is it performed well? And so something could have really good content, and we've seen it in the modern evangelical church, really good lyrics, bad composition performed by a 17-year-old whose mom gave him a Fender Strat, and he's just kind of going to town with it. Well, we need to be more three-dimensional than that in our assessment. So there might be some good music out there that you can enjoy, that the content is nihilistic, right? And it, and you train your kids just like you walk them through some movies. So I'm not saying we need to listen to all Christian music. We do need to listen to more psalms. We do need to listen to more of the great sacred works, the great masses, the great cantatas by Bach. If you want to go through that, the oratorios by Handel, and by others, once again, that there's a gold mine there. I mean, you won't run out of stuff. And the great thing about it for us is all these people are hoity-toity, and they are recording it thinking it's going to advance their careers. And we're saying, thank you. We would love to hear that and more of it, please. And then get to where we can perform it. Because the irony is all this music that is now, all these masses and oratorios, they were all in service of the church. And now the only place you can hear them is in a dusty cathedral or in a concert hall in some, multi-million-dollar facility. So yes, I see some folks on Yuri's put on Dr. Herb's Spotify and the Scottish Psalter. That's great on the chat here on Zoom. The links to that. We want to have a good diet. No filet mignon for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day, but no McDonald's for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day either. We've got to find the wisdom is in the balance. So that would be my encouragement there. What other thoughts? What other comments? These are great. Y'all are just batting 1,000 so far.
Is that a soccer analogy, Jarrod?
Batting 1,000? No, that's a baseball analogy. I probably should have made a soccer analogy, but I would have embarrassed myself. The only thing I can say is goal. That's all I can do, and even still, I'll make the football sign.
That's all you.
Well, I guess a couple other things here, just to kind of let you marinate until we get together. If I'm not too high caffeinated for you, I'd love to come be there in person for us to listen a little bit more, to do a little more discussion about just how to unpack some things. We've got a lot of temptations in the modern church. We are very individualistic, and I'm speaking broadly here. I'm not stepping on your toes necessarily, unless your toes need to be stepped on, in which case I'm happy to do that gently and then check on you. But the idea is that we are too individualistic and we're not corporate enough. So we want the worship style to fit our preference, right? We want to sing the hymns that we like. We forget that we are singing, and the beauty of box music, although we don't need to do that in the church service next week, the beauty of the fuguing tunes in the Cantus Christi, oh, 'twas a joyful sound to hear, a Psalm 122, or the songs like behold the glories of, all those songs where there's all this voice chasing, those are corporate songs. They're songs that you can't sing by yourself to get the full effect. They're songs that are made to be sung as the people of God, and they're what I like to call their body songs. They're corporate songs for corporate worship. You're gathering not as yourself, you're gathering as the body of Christ, and the body of Christ is gathering all over the world, and when it comes into the Lord's presence, it's enthroned in heaven as well. And we need to be thinking more corporately. We want to check ourselves. Sometimes my temptation, your temptation, is before we know it, we have a preference that's slipped in, and it's not really rooted. It's just what we like. And I think we think our preferences and our loves are what we like in music. We think all that's just me, and it can't be wrong. And I think we forget our preferences can be depraved. That shouldn't upset you or depress you. It just should say, when you're talking with folks and you're thinking, give your session and Yuri and Al and your musicians, give them a wide and a long a bit of patience. I'm mixing metaphors here, forgive me. But it's not easy, and they're trying to shepherd you, and you want to think, you might be tempted to quickly go, oh, I just don't like that. Oh, why do we do that hymn? Oh, or you may be thinking, why do we not do this faster? We need to let go of that hymn and do this hymn. Why are we even doing that hymn? And that would be my encouragement within the area of pastorally. You didn't get into this ditch, overnight, and you're not going to get out of it overnight. The church, I'm speaking about us, the American church for sure, if we don't want to speak any further. But the modern church is more concerned about what I like and experientialism than they are about what pleases God, what is a sweet aroma, what encourages my neighbor, what is the Colossians and Ephesians passage exhort us, other than to say, sing to what? One another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. Not plug into God with your 1/4-inch tip and sleeve jack and you and Jesus worship for an hour and a half. we want to sing to God when songs are sung to him, but we want to sing and be mindful of who we are when we're in worship, and y'all do that there. So that would be my encouragement there to you. I also, before I forget, stay with the analogy from earlier about really think about, what do you call good music? Often, if you're like me, if something's good, oh, I like that song. Oh, that's my favorite. You might just be assessing that song because it makes you feel good, right? It may make you feel good for a host of reasons, but think like Bach. Bach wrote music and words and notes and rhythms and entrances of voices so that he could three-dimensionally amen God's goodness and do it in ways that some people will never know that he wrote this art. He did it in submission and in response to the loveliness that he had received from God, and that was his response of praise. I think we need to work towards training our students and training ourselves to mature, to not be snobs, no snobbery. Anytime you talk about maturity in any field, the knee-jerk reaction is to say snobbery, and that can be the case. But I would just encourage you. How do I assess music that I listen to? Is it good? Does it have virtuous qualities to it? Does it have good content, good lyrics? Is it performed well, like I said earlier? And is it composed well? Well, the trouble is we need more people that know how to compose well and how to perform well. So I may be stepping on some toes here, but there's a popular song by Andrew Peterson. If you know, he's a praise and worship writer, also a novelist. The Wingfeather Saga, if you've read some of that, has got some amazing stuff on Advent. And he's got a song that's going around in the last few years called "Is He Worthy?" You might have heard this done before. He wrote it. It's very repetitive. I'm not downing it, but what I want you to know is he wrote it, and there's 2-word responses from the choir in this song. And I got to thinking, wow, that's really telling. I mean, the song is our God worthy? And then the choir responds, he is. Or does the Father really love us? And then the choir or the ensemble responds, he does. And it goes on and on like this. And I got to thinking, and I go, oh, wait, it's well done, but he's writing to a church that can't do much more than that. So I just had to stop and go, okay, we need to make it so that our grandkids who are writing songs are not limited to that. And that's really the job. If you are live another 30 years on this earth, sing as much as you can. Try to sing as loud as Pastor Brito, but don't go hoarse. And don't worry about singing harmony and parts. I guess that better stop here so that y'all can have any more comments. But I absolve you of with no authority whatsoever, of course. But I absolve you of the desire that you're not singing with glory and vigor if you're not singing soprano, alto, tenor, and bass in parts as a congregation. Sing the things unison if you can do it, and sing joyfully. Far better to do that than to stumble on, oh, I can't learn my alto part, right? Just sing the melody. And what if you're singing next to someone who is really weak? Sing the melody for 2 verses so that they can hear it. And then sing to them. And if you can break off and sing tenor or break off and sing alto, go for it. So anyway, any more comments or questions? Or we've gone over an hour. Y'all been very patient. What else am I missing? Any other thoughts? Feel free to talk. Just unmute yourself and
I think that's it, Mr. Richey. Thank you, my friend.
great. All right. Would you mind if I close this in prayer?
No, please do, my brother.
All right. Well, thank you all for your attentiveness. I look forward to, Lord willing, the day when you can we can be together. But until then, I hope this has been an encouragement to you. So I'll close this in prayer and then end this meeting. So thanks for your attendance.
Thank you.
Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the great gift of music. I thank you for the saints there in Providence and Pensacola. Thank you for Yuri and for Al and the deacons and the elders there. And I ask that you would continue to grow their number. Thank you for the testimony of their singing and faithfulness, even as it makes its way up here to Monroe and West Monroe, Louisiana. Thank you for their efforts and their love of you and their service. Would you encourage them and give them opportunities to encourage one another in their singing? And would you help us all to give thanks where we are, to resist the temptation to grumble and to complain, but to look to you for ways to grow and to be a testimony of your goodness, even in the area of singing and making music and enjoying it. We ask that you would bless us through the remaining weeks of this ordeal our country is facing. Help us be able to rejoin in worship and hearty singing and joyful singing sooner rather than later, and that we would be quick to appreciate it and slow to take it for granted, and we would be really refreshed. We thank you now in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, y'all. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jarrod. Lord bless you, my brother.
All right.
Thanks, Jarrod.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jarrod.